I'm Gary Anthony Ramsay with your Hour News Now Rewind. Stories making headlines for the week ending September 4th, 2010. Our top stories include: the president takes another run at the Mideast peace process. Another oil rig explosion rocks the Gulf of Mexico. An Ohio death row inmate is spared execution as new evidence may clear his name. A Pittsburgh teenager sues the police after he claims he was beaten by cops. A black Brit continues to burn up the Grand Prix circuit. And drug-coated stents may have clot risks. Our top story. President Obama joins a list of other U.S. leaders who have tried to broker peace in the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas of the Fatah Party movement come to Washington to attempt to hammer out a peace accord. Joined by the President of Egypt and the King of Jordan in the White House Rose Garden, Barack Obama sounded cautiously optimistic about the start of talks that could take up to a year to complete. The goal of the negotiations is to end Israel's 40-year-old occupation and the creation of a Palestinian state. But Hamas, the elected authority of the Palestinians, is not a part of these negotiations, leaving many to believe the effort will be more show than substance.
We are under no illusions. Passions run deep. Each side has legitimate and enduring interests. Years of mistrust will not disappear overnight. Building confidence will require painstaking diplomacy and trust by the parties.
Netanyahu and Abbas returned to the Middle East amid criticism from their own governments about taking part in the talks right now. Hamas launched an attack that killed 4 Israelis on the eve of the talks. The White House and Gulf Coast states had another scare with the explosion of a second oil rig platform in the Gulf of Mexico. Right now it appears that no oil is leaking into the water, but federal and local authorities are keeping a close eye on the operation, which pumps about 2,000 barrels a day. The Texas-based company that owns the rig says that all 13 workers on the platform are accounted for, and the rig itself was not in production at the time of the explosion. The April explosion of the Deepwater Horizon has created the worst environmental disaster in history. More than 5 million barrels of oil polluted the water and shores of the Gulf Coast. While Texas lawmaker is feeling some heat after she admits to steering scholarship money to friends and relatives. Representative Bernice Johnson says that it was all a mistake and that she will return all of the money in question. Johnson says the money came from the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Relatives of members of Congress are ineligible to receive scholarship funds because of anti-nepotism rules. The Dallas Morning News places the figure at $20,000. The 74-year-old Johnson is seeking her 10th term in Congress and represents an area of Dallas. A Republican opponent who was previously thought to not stand a chance has promised to make this an issue in the campaign. An Ohio convict escapes the death penalty just shy of 2 weeks after Governor Ted Strickland commutes his sentence. The governor cites what he describes as legitimate questions about the conviction of Kevin Keith. Keith was convicted of killing 3 people, including a 4-year-old girl in 1994. Prosecutors said revenge was the motive. But Keith had a 4-witness alibi, and since then, someone else has confessed to the crime.
I was convicted on paper. There was never any physical evidence, and they went out there and found those documents.
Keith was set to be executed on September 15th. His attorneys say they are continuing to push for a new trial. A Pittsburgh teenager who says he was beaten up by cops in January has filed a lawsuit against the police department. Jordan Miles also says that cops conspired to file charges against him to cover up their crime. Miles was an 18-year-old performing arts violinist when he had his encounter with the police. He says he was repeatedly punched and kicked in the snow while being asked for money and drugs. The officers have since been suspended without pay while the FBI investigates the incident. A celebrity Chicago couple is suing the sellers of a $1.8 million suburban home. The Wilborns and the Department of Housing and Urban Development say the couple apparently had more than enough money, but apparently way too much melanin. George and Peyton Wilborn were negotiating the sale of the home when they say the realtor informed them the sellers did not want to sell to African Americans. HUD filed discrimination charges against the sellers and Lowell Realty Group last month. The 8,000 square foot house is still not back out on the market. In Mississippi, A school board reverses its student election policy that was based on race. White students were restricted to some offices, while other offices were restricted to blacks. The Nettleton School District held an emergency session after a woman who is the mother of 4 mixed-race children filed a complaint with the NAACP. The election guidelines allowed only whites to run for class president this year. In alternating years, the positions would be reversed so blacks could run for president and whites could hold other positions.
Even if they change the policies due to this, the attitude hasn't changed. Someone thought that this was okay up until now.
The school board announced its change of policy on its website. In your Our News Now World Wrap, 2 Chicago men are being held in an alleged terror plot to strike against a Danish newspaper. The suspects were captured in Amsterdam after getting off of a flight from Detroit. Tawar Hussein Rana and David Headley are accused of planning an unspecified attack against the same newspaper that published a satirical cartoon in 2005 that depicted the Prophet Muhammad. Investigators say the men were working with a Pakistani-based terror group that has links to Al-Qaeda. In New York, a rising star on the St. Lucia soccer team is gunned down outside of a nightclub. It happened after he scored the winning kick for his country in a tournament. 27-year-old Isidore Philip Tisson was killed after a night of celebrating his country's victory in the Caribbean tournament. After leaving the club at 4:30 in the morning on August 30th, a man approached the car he was sitting in and without saying a word fired into the car. There are no suspects as the investigation continues. In Brussels, a Caribbean Briton becomes the first black to win the Belgian Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton chalks up his 3rd victory of the season and the 15th of his career, and now leads Formula One international competition by 3 points. Hamilton, whose father is black of Grenadian descent and whose mother is a white Briton, says he was named after American speedster Carl Lewis.
It felt incredible. I felt, obviously I was in the lead and I was able to control the pace. The car felt great, really did feel good, and I was able to really pace myself and keep the gap. And every time the guys behind me picked up the pace, I was able to answer to it. So,
the 25-year-old has already won Formula One championship under his belt. He's looking for number 2 with 6 races left on his schedule. That's your World Wrap. In entertainment news, in the American world of racing, NASCAR is hoping a new show on BET will help diversify its ranks and its audience. Changing Lanes debuted on the network this week. It's a reality show that pits minorities against each other for a spot on a racing team owned by entrepreneur Max Siegel.
I established Revolution Racing to give minorities and women a chance to thrive. In order to succeed, I need a star.
Changing Lanes is on BET on Wednesday nights. In health news, a new study reveals that African American patients who use drug-coated stents may be at higher risk for getting life-threatening blood clots. The results are published in Circulation, Journal of the American Heart Association. While drug-coated stents were developed to prevent arteries from re-narrowing, they may also increase the risk of blood clots forming at the site of the implantation. This is often referred to as stent thrombosis. The analysis showed that African Americans were nearly 3 times as likely to develop clots after receiving drug-coated stents than their non-African American counterparts. It's believed that this can be countered by taking anti-clogging medication for up to a year after the stent procedure. For a complete look at any of the stories you've seen on The Rewind, remember, as always, go to the bottom of the webpage, find the link of the story you'd like to see, and click your way through. That's your Our News Now Rewind for this week. I'm Gary Anthony Ramsay.